Hello, everybody. Very nice to see you. One of the beauties of having old friends is that they carry your history, as you know, and you carry theirs. I have a longtime friend. We've been friends since our 20s. We live in different parts of the United States, and we speak on Zoom once a week and read something together. When I told her I was joining this group, she reminded me that years ago, probably in our 20s, I said that my life's goal, my only life's goal, was to read all of Trollope. I'm not sure I'll make it, but having found the Trollope Society, I'm going to be closer than I otherwise would have been. And for that, I'm very grateful to you all. My plan for today, this afternoon for us, and this evening for you, is to take us through the 13 chapters for today with a one-sentence in which summary for each chapter. Then, since this is movie and TV award season, the Golden Globes, the BAFTAs, the People's Choice, Screen Actors Guild, Directors Guild, Independent Spirit, and the Academy Awards, I will hand out a few awards of my own before sending you off to make your own choices. So, chapters 54 through 66. First chapter, Lizzie, the only chapter with a single person's name. And we hear that and we know who that's going to be. In which Lopez's ace in the hole, Lizzie Eustace, Lady Eustace, turns the tables on him and calls him a fool. She does not, however, eat him, which is the last sentence of the chapter. Chapter 55, Mrs. Parker's sorrows, in which the scales fall from Emily's eyes about the effect of Lopez's dealings on Sexty Parker's family. Wonderful monologue by Mrs. Parker about what men are like who get money in their eyes and don't think about anything else. Chapter 56, what the Duchess thought of her husband, in which we learned that the Duchess thinks she should have been prime minister, and so do we, I think, and that the old Duke is beginning to think that perhaps the prime minister should resign, which is very hard for him to come to, since despite his protestations to the contrary, he is largely responsible for his being the prime minister. Chapter 57, the explanation, in which Phineas Finn simply and eloquently defends the prime minister against the Banner's charges of political influence without mentioning the Duchess's name, and at the end is hurt by the prime minister's inability to express gratitude very strongly. He's very cold about it. And we're disappointed too, I think. At least I am disappointed that he wasn't able to rise to the occasion more. Chapter 58 is a quotation from the chapter. This is one of Trollope's ways of making a chapter title. It's called Quite Settled, in which Ferdinand Lopez minds most of all the failure of his Lady Eustace scheme. It's the only thing about which he feels shame. And you ask yourself, perhaps, why exactly that is. What is it about that bothers him so much? Perhaps that it snuck up on him. He didn't expect her to say, I think, Mr. Lopez, you must be a fool. He has his last encounter with Everett Wharton, with Mr. Wharton, and a very moving and lovely departure from Sexty Parker. So we begin to see, I think, Ferdinand Lopez behaving at his best. He's lovely to Sexty Parker. He's honest with him. He tells him it's all over with him and he's going to have to go away. He calls him old fellow and other terms of endearment. It's the only time we see him not just behaving awful to Sexty Parker. Chapter 59, the first and the last, another quotation from the chapter, in which Emily pretends she isn't sending for, but really does send for, and kisses Arthur Fletcher just as her husband walks in. Very melodramatic moment. And Ferdinand Lopez ends the chapter by telling her that she's not going anywhere as far as he knows. So we're beginning to see thunderclouds of a finale approaching if we have not read it before, and I had not. Chapter 60, excuse me, the 10-way junction. I think it's the best chapter in not just this book, but many, many novels. I just think it's just wonderfully done, in which Ferdinand Lopez is also lovely to his wife. He calls her old girl and kisses her not once, but twice. Doesn't berate her, doesn't gaslight her, doesn't treat her badly. Heads for the 10-way junction, is nice to the people there, and walks in front of a train and is scattered into pieces at the end of that chapter. Chapter 61, The Widow and Her Friends, in which Emily's father and brother begin to feel a month or so after the event that they don't need to speak of it anymore. It's over with. Let's move on. Things are fine. And Mr. Wharton forbids both the Duchess and Lady Eustace equally from coming into the house. And everybody has a feeling of responsibility for Ferdinand Lopez's death to one degree or another. If only we hadn't done this, this would have worked out okay. Which, to me, I think indicates the failure to really understand him. Chapter 62, a mysterious title. Phineas Finn has a book to read. And the book that he has to read is the book of the Prime Minister's character, because he refuses the Duke's urging by Mr. Warburton that he sue the Banner for libel when they start accusing him of being responsible for the death. And he's surprised by the Duke's warmth and acquiescence when he does say that he's not going to do it. And I think that one of the ways in which we see this as being different is that the Duke, we hear the Duke stammering. He several times will say the same thing twice over when he said, "Oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. And I hope you're coming down to Matching in August." And that's the book that Phineas Finn has to read, that somehow he's surprised by the Duke in a similar way that we're surprised by Ferdinand Lopez's generous behavior to Sexty and to his wife. Chapter 63 is called The Duchess and Her Friend, which mirrors with The Widow and Her Friends. And the friend you think is going to be Mrs. Finn, but then there's a long, wonderful, wonderful, wonderful duologue between the old Duke and Glencora, in which they, without saying so in so many words, compare their worries about the Prime Minister and agree together to look out for him. And the Duchess admits that of all the people in the world, there are only two that she loves, and one of them is sitting right there in front of her. Chapter 64, the new KG. Maybe all of you in the UK knew what the KG would be, but it needed me to go into the chapter to read it, in which the Prime Minister refuses all advice about whom to appoint to the Knighthood of the Garter. And we see him, not for the first time, but maybe for the most clear time, the way in which power has that he's gotten some power and he likes it. He doesn't admit it to himself, that he refuses the sensible notions about either appointing himself or appointing somebody else that would make sense to everybody else, and instead appoint somebody that nobody, including the person themselves, thinks should be a Knight of the Garter. And consequences ensue from this. Chapter 65, another chapter which is called by a quotation from the chapter, "There must be time," which is repeated several times in the chapter, in which an increasingly anxious Arthur Fletcher writes to Mr. Wharton asking to see Emily, and in which Emily, hounded on all sides by her father and her brother to do something that she doesn't feel ready to do, which sort of been the case from the beginning, bursts into tears, which is unusual, and we haven't seen her do that. And everyone must just stand around being amazed. Nothing further is said at that point. Chapter 66 is the last chapter of my section. It's called The End of the Session, in which the old Duke is so angry with the younger Duke that he ceases making funny, sarcastic remarks to him as they sit in Lords, until he remembers his promise to Lady Glen in chapter 63. And two different political friends at the end of the chapter say, we can't resign in August. So if you start saying we can't resign in August, I think you know that resignation is going to come pretty soon. So it's a very grim sort of way to end, I think. Those are my chapters with so many highlights. I think the Lizzie chapter, the 10-Way Junction chapter, and the conversation between Glencora and the old Duke are just highlights as far as I'm concerned. So here are my awards. Best reversal using a major character from another novel in the series would be, of course, Lizzie. You can sort of imagine Trollope saying, well, I have to get somebody smarter than him to really carry this through. Who could it be? Oh, Lizzie Eustace. And it's complicated by the fact that she wants the adventure. She's interested in doing what he suggests. And I'm not sure what it is. We don't see it from her point of view. Not sure what it is that convinces her that he must be a fool and that she's not going to do it. But that's the way the chapter ends, and it's the beginning of the end for Ferdinand, and he feels shame about this for the first time. Best first sentence of a chapter. This is my second award. And this goes to the new KG. This is just the best sentence. Early in June had died the Marquis of Mount Fidget. Now, he could have said, early in June, the Marquis of Mount Fidget died, and it would not be, in my opinion, nearly so wonderful. Early in June had died the Marquis of Mount Fidget. And I have to thank Dominic. I texted him late to say, I know this can't be pronounced Marquis, but how do you pronounce it? And so he very kindly told me it was Marcus, so I was able to, and it's even better as Marquis of Mount Fidget. I think it's a very funny chapter in many, many ways, and just the first sentence is fabulous and you don't expect it. The best conversation, as I said before, I think the Duchess and her friend, the friend being the old Duke. And the most puzzling refusal is in The Widow and Her Friends, when Mr. Wharton encourages Emily to refuse the Duchess's letter. And I'd just like to look at that briefly, because he's just so, I just don't understand why he's this bad. So she reads it to him, and he only shakes his head and she says, it is meant for kindness, Papa. And he says, yes, I think it is. There are people who have no right to be kind to me. If a man stopped me in the street and offered me half a crown, it might be kindness, but I don't want the man's half crown. And she says, I don't think it is the same, Papa. There's a reason here. And he says, perhaps so, my dear, but I do not see the reason. She became very red. And I think the reason why she is red is because she believes that the Duchess's overture to her absolves her husband of any guilt or responsibility. So even to him, she would not explain her ideas. I think I shall answer it, she says. And he says, certainly answer it. Your compliments to the Duchess, and thank her for her kind inquiries. And she says she will come here. And he says, I should not notice that. Very well, Papa. On the next day, she did write a note, not quite so cold as that which her father proposed, but still saying nothing as to the offered visit. Now, I can understand his refusing to let Lady Eustace come, but I don't quite get the coldness here. It's puzzling to me. Maybe the other people have ideas. Best Tolstoy call out, the 10-Way Junction. I'm reading the 10-Way Junction for the first time, and someone dies by train, and I think of Anna Karenina. And it develops that Tolstoy was a big admirer of Trollope, that he was reading, according to notes and biographies, he was reading this novel at the time he was finishing up Anna Karenina. And I think there's a connection. One of the criticisms that I'm reading says that death by a mechanism was the big terror of from the latter part of the 19th century on into our time, just as the final judgment would have been a big terror for a previous time. So I think both of them dying by machine. Best Shakespeare callback, and this occurred to me when Ferdinand Lopez behaves well to Sexty, to his wife, to the shop girl at Tenway Junction, and to the pundit at Tenway Junction. And you remember in Macbeth when the Thane of Cawdor has rebelled against the king, and he's brought down and killed. And Malcolm says of him, nothing in his life became him like leaving it. And to me, that's also true of Ferdinand Lopez, that he has a real humanity that we see shining through him, that he's able to be a certain way when he's made up his mind. He has an ease and a pleasantness and a kindness that he cannot elsewhere let himself show. So nothing in his life became him either, as much as the leaving of it did. The best Cervantes call out, both Mrs. Finn and, more worriedly, the old Duke called the Prime Minister quixotic. Mrs. Finn likes that term and thinks of it as something nice to say about him and approves of that. And it's the worst thing in the world that the old Duke can think of saying. You don't want a politician to be quixotic, and he's worried about that. The most mysterious chapter title, I've got perhaps two candidates here. First, Phineas Finn has a book to read. I don't think we know what that means, even though Mrs. Finn and Glencora have talked about the Prime Minister as being a book that one has to read. We don't quite know what that means until we get into that chapter, and then it's referred to at the end of the chapter. The runner-up is, for my case anyway, the new KG. I didn't know what that meant. So those are my awards, my 8 or 9 awards. And now I release you to decide on your own trophies. Thank you very much.